Your vision became a reality. It's lasted longer than a lot of nonprofits have lasted, and it's still out there, still doing something. What would your hope be for us for the next 10 years?
My hope for EdPost is not unlike my hope for America, which is that we start to swing back away from this extremist politics that has been, I think, so destructive over the last decade, and get back to the idea that the goal of public policy debates is to find common ground. It's not to just take a hard and fast position and refuse to budge.
So, Peter, thank you for joining me today to talk about EdPost, your creation, the vision that you had years ago. It's 10 years old now. You must have seen a lot in 10 years. And I just want to start because I'm really interested. I came along later, but I want to know what your vision was for the organization, and what did you think would happen if you were wildly successful? Like, what was your thing that you wanted to happen when you started EdPost?
So the thing that was on my mind the most was that there was a conversation underway around education that was mostly the voices of, politicians, some educators, union leaders, some, superintendents, higher ups, elites, so to speak, or just people in power in one way or another. Whereas the voices of parents, teachers, and kids were not very present. The mainstream media, the education media tended to treat them as afterthoughts. Like, they throw in a quote from a parent who's pissed about something or what other. But the real story was, here's what the superintendent says, here's what the union leader says, here's what the politician says. And it just felt like, this story was happening. Meanwhile, all of the work was about children, and marginalized children, children from low-income communities, children of color, children without power, from communities without power. And I just felt like I really wanted to sort of overcorrect for that by very explicitly recruiting people, from parents, recruiting teachers, recruiting students, and give them a platform and just treat them as absolute equals in the conversation. That was my original idea. My original funders had a slightly different idea. They called it, one of them thought of it as a rapid response operation to sort of defend reform against kind of opponents of reform. And for me, reform was really about, three basic issues: standards, accountability, and choice, public school choice. And all three were sort of under siege at the time. So those were some of the original kind of dynamics underway when we founded Education Post.
There was a sense back then that that we were losing the narrative with the public, and that it was even unsafe for people that cared about things like accountability and standards and high quality charter schools. Um, we're like a world away from that now, but what was going on that made us feel like we were losing and that we had to actually kind of go after the narrative?
Yeah, so these were, I wouldn't say the very early days of Twitter, but Twitter, relatively speaking, was kind of a new thing. There were a few people who had big followings, had 20, 30, 40,000 people. A few had really a lot more than that, very few. But there was a real sense that if you stood up and said anything in favor of, Common Core standards, or in favor of, public school charters, or in favor of accountability, you could get kind of swarmed by opponents and accused of everything from taking, funding from people who don't care about kids, or people who are right wing, or people who are, trying to defund education. It's just like this cesspool of kind of accusations and cancellations and hostilities. And it was just really challenging to voice your opinion. And what we often said at the time was, we want to make it safe for people to say what they want to say. And one of the ways we made it safe was by building a network of people who are willing to jump into these conversations on a moment's notice, or at least, relatively quickly, when they saw someone getting swarmed for simply saying, I'm a parent and I would really like my children to have more options, more educational options. Or I'm a parent and I'm disappointed in the level of student performance in the schools, and or I'm a parent and I feel like this, pushback against high standards is bad for kids. So we would come to their rescue. We would jump into these conversations. We would protect them from these kind of online bullies that we saw a lot of. And at the same time, and you remember this, of course, very well, you were exhibit A of this strategy. We were trying to look for people who were willing to, speak out, to write on blogs, to go on television, to sort of be voices for educational improvement and for some of the policies that we supported. So we would, fund them. We would give them resources. We would give them support. We would help edit their material. We would help distribute it. We would help them write op-eds, and mostly just support them and let them know they're not alone out there. So that's what was going on. And there were a bunch of forces underway at the time that were making it harder and harder to stand up in favor of education reform. It started in 2010 with the Tea Party, came from the right, where, the first year or two of the Obama administration had been very, very heady time. And as you know, I was there working in the U.S. Department of Education. And there was this feeling like we had a lot of extra resources from the American Recovery Act, ARRA. We were trying to really drive change and drive accountability, drive districts and states to do things that were sometimes tough to do, like raise standards. But the Tea Party came along at the end of 2010 and kind of twisted the election, cost Democrats control of Congress. And before you know it, suddenly education reform started to become a dirty word. And a lot of our dear friends in the policy world just like flipped overnight from being big advocates for accountability and high standards and reform to suddenly being all against the federal role. Anything that smacked of a federal role was too heavy-handed. One-time allies in around some of these issues suddenly abandoned them. So that was the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened was that the left simultaneously abandoned some of this. We had a lot of support from unions, from progressives. Charter schools were not just seen as some right-wing conspiracy to weaken unions, but they were seen as, laboratories of experimentation. And quite often, the genesis of these things were from the left. Al Schenker, most famously had embraced them back in the early 90s. The first state to do them was your state, Minnesota. And so, there was a lot of progressive support for choice. There was bipartisan support for high standards, and that came out of the states. Governors had all gotten together in Charlottesville, I think, in like 1989. President Bush showed up and George H.W. Bush. And, they all agreed that high standards was a good thing. And it took most of the 90s to sort of figure out how to do it. And then No Child Left Behind came along. Again, bipartisan support. I believe President Biden voted for it. And when he was a senator. And, there was just a lot of people coalescing around the idea of accountability and choice and standards. And then that bipartisan alliance really began to fray. And by 2014, it was fully dissolved, might be the word.
Well, it realigned a little bit, didn't it? It realigned because I think with the Every Student Succeed Act, you saw Randy Weingarten on the union side, and I forgot the Republican guy's name who she was working with. It was a bipartisan anti-standards group. Now, I forgot his name, but I think he's even from Minnesota. So,
you mean Lamar Alexander?
I can't remember. I don't think it was
senator.
Lamar, but I want to say John Klein. Maybe it was Lamar, but I know that it was, to me, the first time that I saw this new kind of coalition against standards and testing, and it was left-right.
You're absolutely right. We suddenly realized that folks on the left and on the right were uniting against a lot of the things that we've been pushing for. So, again, Education Post was our attempt to create a platform where it was safe to say that I really want to see our kids support high standards.
I want to stick here for a second because I want to come back to that. But you were in the Obama White House. or in the administration. You were in the Department of Education. You got to see some things. And you just mentioned something that triggered this thought for me. So the first George Bush was wanting to be the education president. President Clinton wanted to be the standards charter school accountability standards, guy. Like he wanted to be an education president. We must get American kids. Ted Kennedy and George Bush, George Walker Bush worked together because they want to be the education government. They want to be the ones that like push us ahead. And then a black guy becomes president, and all of a sudden everything's government overreach. And we don't need no standards. We don't need no administration telling us what to do. We don't need no education. Am I oversimplifying that? If I say it that way, am I oversimplifying it?
Well, like I said, there was remarkable bipartisan support in the first 2 years of the Obama administration. It really was historic, and all kinds of columnists from David Brooks and Tom Friedman to many, many others were sort of celebrating that and saying, "Oh my God, this is the issue of the 21st century. How do we become educationally competitive? How do we really lead the world in this field?" Remember, everybody was so obsessed with Finland back then, thought it was so great. And, Finland was the Minnesota of the world, the place where all the kids are above average. There's no poverty or anything like that.
That's right.
It was Lake Wobegon. So I don't know. There was certainly, and we still see it in today's politics, sort of a racist undercurrent to the opposition to Obama. And, arguably some of the right-wing populism that you're seeing today was a reaction to Obama. I mean, Trump succeeded Obama, and he succeeded Obama by inflaming racial divisions, by inflaming hostility to, migrants, people of color. So I would certainly not dismiss your point.
Thesis.
Your thesis. But I would say that for a couple of years there, that wasn't the case. It really felt like everybody was united. At least it did to me in my
I forgot about
little world.
What you just said. I do remember that there was positive kind of conservative press that this guy is still going to do. He's not going to just bend his knee to the establishment. He's going to still push hard for reform.
Yeah, I remember George
that,
Will, one of the patron saints of the conservative movement, of traditional conservatism, came and interviewed Arnie and was very complimentary of him. And so, a guy like him, when he writes a complimentary column, that signals to a lot of people, you now have permission to support Arnie Duncan and Barack Obama. And, Arnie was approved by, I think, unanimously or certainly by a huge majority of senators from both sides of the aisle. And they were excited by Race to the Top. And the first states to win Race to the Top grants were Tennessee and Delaware. I think a Republican, Haslam, and a Democrat governor of,
He's Tennessee,
Delaware.
wasn't he?
Yeah,
was it
Haslam
Delaware?
was Tennessee. Haslam was Tennessee. I forget the governor of Delaware. But, and Arnie had good relationships with everybody. He called every governor in the country who applied for Race to the Top, including the ones he had to tell them they lost. He personally took that responsibility on. And he had their respect and their trust that he was fighting for kids. And, I wouldn't say that we were antagonistic to unions, but we weren't beholden to them. I mean, Barack Obama very famously challenged them in a speech during the campaign before he was elected, where he told them, he was going to push a reform agenda, and he got booed by the NEA, and I can't remember if they endorsed him when it mattered or only later when when he already had the full endorsement and it was sort of obligatory, and Randy Weingarten got up and gave a speech in which she embraced the idea of teacher accountability with, a multiple measures way of evaluating teachers that included test scores. She gave that speech in 2010. So there was just this feeling that maybe we were having a real breakthrough. But then, like I said, it really changed right after the midterm election in 2010. And the Tea Party was so anti-Washington. And my analysis of it was that that's what sort of gave everybody permission. And sure enough, George Will, I do distinctly remember a column from him coming out principled opposition to Common Core. And he called it coercive policy because it was actually not mandated. We didn't mandate it. It was voluntary. We said just adopt high standards. Doesn't have to be Common Core. But anyway, I'm going way back. So the bottom line is, by the time Education Post came along, there was a real feeling that education reform was on its heels, and we needed to, come back again. TFA, remember Teach for America? They were everybody's darling for 20 years. And then suddenly they became a dirty word. They became demonized from all sides as interlopers, not authentic teachers,
Privatizers.
Yeah, privatizers, right. So,
I think you're adding a piece here, though, that nobody talks about. Like this thing that you just added, like I haven't thought very much about it, but the roots of the Tea Party going back to 2010 was the precursor of the MAGA thing.
Correct.
But when the Tea Party started, they were still fringe. So the Republican institutions still could marginalize them a little bit, right? They hadn't fully flipped the party.
Yeah, no, they flipped fast after that, though.
Yeah.
And this is where, as you said, suddenly it was like, hey, guess what? There's a whole ton of people out there who really hate the fact that we have a black president. Yes. So I guess we ought to, honor them, honor their view. And, maybe it's okay to admit that. Suddenly, it became okay. And then,
well, they elected a guy who ran on Obama not having an American birth certificate.
Correct.
I mean, when that's your selling point. So here's something that I remember that I find really interesting because I think we may have switched positions from when I first met you. And, to tell that story, I've told this story to everybody. I'm in Minnesota. I'm blogging. I'm this dad that's pissed off. I don't think anybody's listening. So when you don't think anybody's listening, you can write whatever you want. I'm going to work every day in a job that I don't necessarily love. And I'm coming home and blogging at night, just my thoughts, because I'm a black guy that has a kid and I want to be heard and I want to say something. Then I get a call out of the blue from you in Chicago. You have me come down to Chicago. And EdPost wasn't fully formed yet. It was still kind of like I think in its beginning, like its real kind of nucleus. And what was interesting to me then was I always marveled at you because you believed that people could be talked to. And I was this pugilist. I thought people needed a punch in the face. You once told me that, like, Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. Well, I wanted to be the guy that made sure that everybody knew their plan wasn't working, right? By delivering those punches. But you believed in this concept that started EdPost, which is better conversation, better education. You had lines of communication open with people that disagreed with you greatly. And you still felt like they were conversation was redeemable with them. Took me a long time to come back to that. Like now it's 10 years later and I'm starting to see now that that's actually the way forward now, but you believed it back then. What made you so sure and positive and zen about better conversation, we'll make better education. And it doesn't always have to be, fighting and being a pugilist.
Well, I mean, I'm not a throw a punch guy, generally speaking. I do like to be truthful to a fault almost. I do like to be truthful, and I've been accused of being overly blunt. I worked with Arnie, and Arnie was really masterful at avoiding fights he didn't need to take on. He wasn't afraid of a fight, but he would sort of do whatever he can to avoid it, or he would not fall into it just out of sort of short-sightedness or honor or sort of just to do it. He would avoid it. He would look for common ground. He would look for middle ground. He was very, very clear in his head about, if you can win 60% or 70%, going to war over the 30 doesn't make a lot of sense. On the other hand, if you can only get 30, maybe it's not good to give in. But he just had a philosophy of trying to find common ground, whether it was with conservatives on the right or the progressives on the left or unions or something. He just always said we can work together. So for example, we had this conference that we did that involved the union leader and the superintendent from various districts. And the whole idea was to get the union leader and the superintendent in the room and see if they could work together towards something, whatever, high standards, some level of choice, accountability, but keep them at the table as opposed to have them spending 4 years just sniping at each other in the media. Just because they have to appeal to their base or whatever. So I think Arnie was one factor that drove me to better conversation, better education. The other thing is, I'm a communications guy, and I believe that more often than not, most people are processing all of this work, not by reading the data, not by reading the studies, not by, educating themselves about the policy issues, but by, just following the debates in the media, following what people are saying. So I'm a big believer in managing that and encouraging, intelligent dialogue as opposed to drive-by comments intended just to inflame and
Sniping.
escalate. Yeah, it's just not that
Yeah.
useful. So I
Yeah.
just really believe that if we all learn to talk more productively and respectfully, that could lead to, better conversation and better education. And, more often than not, people who would get into conversations about education policy would default to like personal attacks, right? How many times have you seen that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so what good is that? I've mostly in my life, I'm pretty sure always, but maybe not. Maybe there are some examples where I just, avoided that. I don't do that. Everybody would accuse me, well, you're not an educator. You weren't a teacher. No, I'm not. I am a taxpayer. I was a parent. I was a federal official. I worked at the local level in Chicago. I've read a ton of studies. I've done a lot of things. And I'm entitled to my opinion because I am an American citizen. So, but if you want to delegitimize me by saying I'm not a teacher, that's fine. You can go right ahead and do that.
It was always remarkable that you never took it personal, for one. And number two, you had a certain thing that no other white leader in the space had at the time. You knew when you didn't need to be the one talking. You had a very good sense of, maybe I don't have to be the one saying anything about this particular thing. Maybe somebody else should say that. And not only that, you were good at it, you insisted on it. Like, there's a lot of times where you just be like, yeah, I don't know that I'm the guy to say that. I don't know that that's anything for me to say. I think that's for a Black parent to say so.
Right. Who's the best messenger? Yeah, thinking that through a lot. And I really, really, really was committed to that idea of elevating the voices of, people of color, just because they've been so marginalized for so long. I've been in a million rooms with, the 9 white people and the 1 Black person a million times. It still happens. I'm working on gun violence in Chicago here. Every once in a while, I look around in a Zoom meeting or something. I say, okay, who forgot to invite the Black people? It's their
Mm-hmm.
kids who are dying, and yet here we all are having the
Fixing the
conversation
world.
again. Yeah, trying to fix the
Yeah.
problem. So it still happens, and so I believe you have to overcorrect. So all this, hostility to DEI is just so sickening. I mean, we're doing this for a reason because we all have our flaws. We all have our unintentional biases. And frankly, there's a lot of people with intentional biases. And so we do this stuff for a reason. You have to overcorrect for, for what we're up against. How many school superintendents of big urban districts filled with minority students are white? How many of those superintendents are
Mm-hmm.
white, right? How many of those
Mm-hmm.
teachers are white? You know the answer as well as I do. So, and it doesn't mean a white teacher can't be a terrific teacher to kids of color, but you still have to work hard to diversify and overcorrect. And I just really believe that.
When I say I was kind of the pugilist, the kind of punch in the face guy, it wasn't random. It was because I had so many friends that were doing good work that themselves would become attacked and they didn't have time to respond, or they couldn't because of their position. And their opposition always knew that they couldn't respond. So they just kind of just tagged them, and it burned good people out. It burned out, good Black principals of schools. It burned out like teachers trying to do good work who might say the wrong thing at the wrong time.
Yeah.
I knew a bunch of TFA people that were
Yeah.
really great people. I still know them today, and they were really amazing people, and they couldn't respond when the haters were coming after them, which I started thinking, well, that could be my role because
Right.
I believe, you need to do that work. And I'm not a teacher. I'm not an educator. I'm a parent. but I have time. So, why don't you just keep doing your work?
I'll go even further. I am paid to help you. So
Right.
I'm going to earn my salary here. There was so many people, Kevin Huffman down in Tennessee, Cammie in Newark, Cammie Anderson, Paymon, what he was doing in Camden, all around the country, Michelle Rhee in DC. There's just so many people who I thought were trying to do the right thing, but had systematically been canceled, delegitimized, attacked, abused. And it just, and it's not unique to education. It's in other spaces as well. People who fight for gun control or gun safety laws, end up getting attacked.
I think people forget about how nasty it got.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons why EdPost existed, because, you just mentioned Michelle Rhee. Love her, hate her, agree with her, whatever, that's not even the point. The left wing was putting out memes of her that were so on the edge of racist and sexist from the left side that it might as well have been the Tea Party.
Right.
It was like the left version of the Tea Party. They were putting out stuff about her and Cammie and the others that went beyond the pale of just disagreeing, like on policy or just agreeing. It was personal.
Right.
It was meant to hurt them, right? In reality. And here we come along. So we had real voices, real parents who were talking about, listen, all that other stuff you guys talk about, that's not really what I care about. I care about my kid. My kid's not getting a great education right now. So we amplified them. We amplified the teachers that are like, listen, man, I get to hear what goes on in the teacher's lounge, and it's not always the best for our kids. Nope. It's not always the best conversation for our kids, right? We gave them a platform. We built the platform for them, which I think actually still to this day is amazing. Do you have any misgivings? Is there anything where you think like you didn't get it right, or that you're sad that the world changed the way that it did? Because, we had such a positive outlook.
Well, folks I agreed with also were not guiltless when it came to escalating in an ugly way. So I certainly regret that folks I wanted to support would sometimes succumb to the same tactics that I felt that reformers were victims of. I think that all of us have to intentionally practice the art of humility. We're talking about human beings in classrooms, in complicated settings, and with complex dynamics, from poverty to gender issues, to gender identity, I should say, to learning disabilities. There's just so much that makes this organism called a classroom a very complicated one. And again, I never was a teacher, so I just had the deepest respect for those who were, and who somehow knew how to walk into a room with 20 or 30 kids and turn it into some kind of a functioning learning environment. I mean, that's a miracle. So I think being humble, I worked a lot in Chicago, and we were really trying to do things like close and reopen schools that were struggling despite getting a lot of support, like, challenging communities to really think through what kind of schools they want, challenging teachers to embrace technology or to embrace new learning standards. And, we were asking a lot of people. I'm sure I probably could have been more humble about how much we were asking at different times in my life.
If you had to start EdPost today, given the current political and educational situation, what would be your aim? Like, what would be your goals and your focus today?
Wow, it's a good question, because it so much feels to me like ed reform as we knew it is kind of lost in the woods. So I kind of wouldn't begin there. I'd begin much more with kids, and what's happening with them. And I'd sort of really, really, really build it from this child perspective, and from the perspective of what is happening with kids, and do everything I can to sort of forget all the wonky debates that are disconnected from the everyday realities that kids are facing. I'm studying jazz guitar right now. And one of the things about jazz, you can learn all these little formulaic riffs and things like that, and scales and everything. But you have to get to a point where you forget them all, where they sort of just kind of inform your playing, but you're not executing scales. And, you just have to get back to music. to improvising or whatever it is you want to do. And similarly with education, I would just want to get away from all of the tired debates that we've been having and just say there's this lens we're going to look at everything through, which is the kids, which is the welfare of the kids and the progress of the kids and the joyfulness of the kids and the safety and comfort level of the kids. And if that becomes, and the outcomes, the student outcomes, and, just so I think I'd probably spend a little less time engaged in the kind of inside the bubble debates and a little more time just celebrating and highlighting children and calling out the challenges they're facing.
How would you handle the fact that you used to believe so much in parents and that parents needed to be heard, especially marginalized parents need to be heard? And parents' rights today has taken on the strategy of, well, let's just give every parent some money and so they can leave the system and, go to whatever school, right? Like, with so much of the politics tied up in that particular conversation, it feels like it's sucked out a lot of the oxygen in the room for the things that we care about for kids. I mean, you were never for like a full scale kind of voucher world.
No.
That was never your tactic. So
no.
How would you handle that now?
I consider myself a progressive, a liberal, a Democrat, whatever your term you want to choose. I plead guilty to all of them. And so I believed in public investment as a good thing. And by believing in public investment, you're sort of philosophically opposed to the idea that everyone can do whatever they want. Like, you can do whatever you want with your own money, but as a taxpayer, you can't do whatever you want with taxpayer dollars. We have a system. It's called elections, and we elect people and they make those decisions. And if you don't like them, you vote them out next time around. We don't let people take their defense dollars and go off and do what they want with them, right? Um, on the other hand, they all go off and buy guns with their personal dollars, just like some people buy Catholic school education with their personal dollars, and that's fine. So no, I had a lot of friends like you and, Durrell and others who really, really felt like, low-income Black kids should have the same opportunities as high-income white kids whose parents can afford private schools. And I was sympathetic to the argument. I just fundamentally thought that in the long run, it would just continue to isolate the poorest and the most vulnerable. And so I was not in favor of vouchers. But I didn't consider it, frankly, a big issue because I knew it would never be a gigantic piece of the pie. Most people are still going to go to public schools. So talk about picking battles. That wasn't a battle I felt I had to, that wasn't a hill I felt I had to die on by any means. I was much more interested in the other ones. But just to go back to my philosophy, I believe that shared investment is what makes America great. That's what makes America great, is when we agree to set aside some beautiful spaces and call them parks. It's when we agree to invest some money and build roads and ports and airports. It's when we agree to fund public education and fund higher education. It's when we agree that there are certain investments we have to make collectively and we can't make individually. And, we're all socialists to one degree or another in America. No matter how right-wing you are, you use the roads, you use the schools, you rely on the banking system, you rely on the police, you rely on the laws and the courts to protect your property and to protect your business arrangements and things like that. So to me, this whole socialism versus kind of libertarian freedom thing it's a spectrum, right? Some people don't think we need an EPA. I think we do need an EPA. But those same people might agree that we need an SEC to regulate the stock market. And so we're all to one degree or another in favor of responsible, fair, just government. It's just a question of degree.
I feel like we might be losing that battle a little bit, not to go off topic, but we also live in a country where people have no problem with insulin costing 50 times what we sell it to the rest of the world for. And somehow that makes sense to us. Like somehow it makes sense to us. We would vote for people that say, no, it's a good thing that insulin is 50 times more expensive in the United States, where it came from. Discovered on taxpayer dollars, by the way. And we sell it to the rest of the world cheaper. that one example to me says so much about our politics and our problem, like the problem that we have, getting people to focus on what's good for us.
Yeah, I've read about this. It's a term called dynamic pricing. And the idea that if you can get away with selling insulin to Americans for $1,000 a pill, but you can't sell it to Africans for $1,000 a pill. So you sell it to them for $1 a pill, but you can sell it to America for $1,000 a pill, and you get away with it. I mean, it's a sad kind of side effect of unregulated capitalism. I'm a capitalist, but I believe in regulated capitalism, and
Yeah.
I believe that there are some issues that the market won't solve. The market will not insure people with pre-existing conditions. Government had to come in and say, you have to do it and force them. The market won't house the homeless.
Mm-hmm.
The market probably wouldn't educate low-income kids.
That's the rip right now on where we were. And that's where I wanted to get to, is just my big aha as somebody that was always for choice, always on the front lines out there, the guy demanding choice. Get these Black kids a coupon to get out of these schools and get all the opportunity everybody else is going to get. Actually, it's a lie. The business mechanics of that don't work. And you're not getting the same opportunities with your little $6,000 or $7,000 or $8,000. You're not getting the same opportunities that people that are going to $30,000 a year, private schools. But not only that, the market itself is doing so great by us in so many other places that we should put all our kids in the market, right? That makes sense. We should do that. Like, this is all stuff that's an aha to me now because of one thing. And it's something that EdPost started with and believed in, that is no longer important to anybody, which is accountability, standards, assessment, teaching and learning. These are all the things that made me have an aha that a voucher is a political intervention, not an educational intervention.
Yep.
So we're trying to fix education problems with devices that aren't likely to solve educational problems.
No, I mean, a voucher's goal is to get a kid out of the public school system, get him off the payroll, or get him off the tax rolls. Give him $8,000 instead of spending $20,000. So their victory is as soon as that kid takes the voucher, not whether the kid actually learns anything, whether he even gets into a school. They don't care about any of that. They're fine with charlatans opening schools that don't teach anybody anything. Take that voucher, and they don't care about it. So I want to even check myself now. I'm not going to say that about everybody. I'm sure there are some people who push vouchers who believe that it's about creating opportunity. So I'll even withdraw exactly what I said. But my broad point is that you're right. It's a political intervention. Its goal has a political outcome, which is, shifting dollars out of the public school system. And that's really the reason why I was for charters, but not for vouchers, because charters, in my opinion, keep the money in the public school system. They're just creating different kinds of schools for people.
And you still have civil rights in charter schools.
Yeah,
you still have civil rights and protections.
You still have accountability.
So you have accountability that you're not going to have.
To the extent you have it at all, it still applies to charter schools. It really doesn't apply in private schools. And we both know that private schools essentially, discriminate is the wrong word, but they don't serve kids in need. Why would they? They don't have to. They're not going to take the kid with the extreme disabilities. They're not going to take the kid with big learning issues. They're not going to take the kid with a challenged home life. They're not going to take any of those things. They don't have to.
I think, like most markets, there will be a subprime market of schools.
Oh, there you go.
There will be like a version of like the check cashing places, and then there'll be places that are like banks, right?
Yep.
And that'll be the market that we're putting kids into. The overall thing about EdPost, I think it always had the right idea about this that's so important right now, which is of every policy asking the question, what's the research say about the outcomes?
Yeah.
Because we cared about outcomes. You used to say it all the time, results. Like results.
Yeah,
I mean, the name of the foundation, people don't know this. The name of the foundation behind EdPost was called Results in Education Foundation.
Yeah.
Right. Now nobody wants to talk about results when they bring up proposals. Nope. When they bring up proposals, let's not talk about that results stuff, So I think we have to be the results platform. The thing you thought about all along was that yeah, show me the kind of research on that thing that you're proposing. And I think we're going to lose a lot because nobody cares about that anymore, which is sad to say.
Yeah, and it's not to say that measuring results isn't complicated and can be misleading sometimes. Like we know that test scores don't capture the gifts of every child. So we know that some people don't test well. We know all those things. But something is better than nothing. Test scores directionally tell you an awful lot about where things are and where they're going. Right now, there are test scores for the last 10 years. National tests have now shown that Chicago is one of the fastest improving big city school districts in the country.
I saw that. Nobody saw that coming.
Yeah, so Chicago's
Yeah.
doing something right.
Yeah.
And the idea that we're going to either dismiss that or ignore it or downplay it or not learn from it is absurd. Why
Well, and
wouldn't?
one of the ways that we know that is because we have data.
Yeah,
That's how we know it,
yeah.
because we have data, and people
Right.
want to kill the data now. Well, listen, it's 10 years in. I would love to just know your hope for us for EdPost. You've stayed connected to the organization all these years. Your vision became a reality. It's lasted longer than a lot of nonprofits have lasted, and it's still out there, still doing something. What would your hope be for us for the next 10 years?
My hope for EdPost is not unlike my hope for America, which is that, we start to swing back away from this extremist politics that has been, I think, so destructive over the last decade, and get back to the idea that the goal of public policy debates, the goal is to find common grounds. It's not to just take a hard and fast position and refuse to budge, but it's to recognize that, teacher unions are important players in this whole debate. And let's see the good in them, not just the bad in them or whatever, but see them also as vital and important players. Same way with, the policy folks who are, most of whom are well-meaning and are trying to do good things. Even the politicians. I mean, I don't really think that politicians wake up every day hoping that schools fail. Maybe a few do. Maybe a few sort of have some long-term vision in which failed education will be better for America, but most of them don't, I think. And that we just get back to the finding things that we can, work together on. And, so I'd like Education Post to continue to be that voice. I'd still like the core mission of making sure that the parent is on the same level as the politician and the union leader and the superintendent, I think would be a great aspiration. We have PTA groups, right? That's the historic kind of platform for parents. PTA associations were not really power players when it came to education. Here in Chicago, we're transitioning now to an elected school board. In order to qualify, you have to get several thousand signatures. You need 1,000 good ones. So you really need to get about 2,000 or 3,000 so that you're going to withstand a challenge. Really, really, really difficult for parents. Most of our parents are low income. The job is unpaid. Every month, the agenda shows up. It's about 1,000 pages long. I mean, and you were a school board member, so you know this. How can parents possibly find the time? Low-income parents, hardworking parents, busy parents, parents with young children. How can any of them have the time and the resources to really be effective members of the school board? So I really worry that school systems themselves just don't want to be, don't want to hear parents, don't want to listen to them. And, parent power, as I've held it up, has also been misused. And we've seen it with these kind of anti-book, anti-intellectual activities and this, book banning and these terrorists who are going after librarians and everything. I've seen all that kind of stuff. And teachers are fearful in states like Florida. So the bargain, so to speak, between taxpayers, school systems, and parents and students is a delicate one. And you really have to wake up every day committed to honoring that bargain and to doing your part to uphold it. And it's just really easy for people to, move away from their obligation and get locked into some position that's counterproductive. So, right. I'd really like to see Education Post continue to be a voice for thoughtful outcomes for kids.
We're going to keep pushing on it. And, what I want to say to you that, we don't get oftentimes to talk to you a lot about it is, number one, you open the door for a lot of people. There are so many organizations that spun out of EdPost. There's so many voices that are doing different things now out in the world that are on independent platforms. And I hear from them all the time. We talk all the time that got their start, that incubated somehow in EdPost. And now they're off in the world doing something completely different. Some of them have other communications platforms. Some of them have started whole organizations that are really well funded and nationally known now. I think about Carrie at NPU. I mean, taking 200 parents to DC to meet with the president's people of the United States. So you're one day sitting in a segregated part of a city that has been forgotten and marginalized, and the next day you're in DC talking to the people that have some power to change things. That came out of EdPost. There's so many writers, talkers, thinkers that came out of EdPost that it's amazing. It's astounding. If you ever wanted to say, was your life's work complete? Did you do a lot? It could be measured in the number of people that came through EdPost and are doing something really great now. You also you weren't partisan to any type of person. You gave everybody a chance. We were a place where everybody could get a platform, and we were all different. All of us were very, very different. Yeah, it sure was a pain in your ass at times with the beginning of staff. The first staff that we had, I remember some staff meetings. We were all over the place politically and whatever. And here you were having to be,
No, and as you know, some of our early bloggers have gone on to illustrious careers as on the right, being part of the kind of Moms for Liberty movement, etc. So, I was unapologetic about my own politics, but I thought we were pretty supportive of folks who were across the spectrum. You yourself, as you said, a stronger advocate for choice than I was, but I felt it was important. So, yeah, I'm really proud. I'm really proud every time I see somebody from the old EdPost days now running an organization, Neo down in Oklahoma, in Tulsa, and Sharif and Carrie, as you said. And there's just lots of people that, needed that start, needed that help, but now they're out there.
Marilyn Rames. Do you remember Marilyn?
Of course, Marilyn.
Chicago teacher, moved down to Arkansas, got her PhD through a program down there. Now she's Dr. Marilyn Rames.
Right.
There's so many people that came through our platform. Not long ago, we redid the back end of our website. The number of people that had published with us was astounding. The number of people that have an EdPost article, blog post, whatever with us is just astounding. It's like I meet people today and I'm talking to them as if they don't know all about EdPost. And they'll be like, yeah, I wrote for you guys. Like,
right.
Like,
I think we had, about 1,500 people or something like that?
It turned out to be more than that even. I mean, in 10 years, we have published a lot of people. And it's funny because you can't keep up with them. You'll be talking to someone and they will totally say, like 3 years ago, I wrote for you guys several times. Yeah, I wrote this for you.
Just on a related matter, Chris, I don't know, we're running out of time probably, but now I'm working in violence prevention with Arnie here in Chicago. And there's a program called Contextos, which is all about giving these guys a chance, these, guys who've been justice involved, as they say, done time, caught up in street life and street violence, to write, just to give them a chance to write, tell their story. And it's so profound. It's so empowering to say, we're going to help you write your story. We're going to give you a byline. We're going to give you a platform. We're going to share it. It's really just something I'm really, really proud of. And I'm so glad that you're continuing it.
Well, you should publish those through EdPost, this little platform we have called EdPost. Along those lines, we want to be the platform that tells good stories, things that are positive and forward-leaning. To that end, I've been invited to go to a prison in Connecticut, I think, and there's a program in the prison where people are getting their BA degrees in jail, or in penitentiary. And I'm fascinated about those stories because it's not just about a test score. It's about what's possible for all people. Like, can we always be learning? So hopefully those stories that your guys in Chicago are writing make it to us somehow so that we can amplify and promote even more voices. Peter, thank you so much for everything. Thank you, number one, for opening a million doors for me, making it possible for me to be heard by way more people, heard, seen, appreciated, hated, become infamous.
Right.
And no matter how infamous I became, you've never like stepped away. You never like said, yeah, I'm just gonna leave you out there to hang or whatnot. You've been a consistent in my life that I don't even have to think about it, like whether or not Peter's going to be supportive or not. So that's actually not something I can say about many people at all. I'm very, very, very appreciative of that because you've seen what has happened in my life, from the time that you've met me. So it's all a testament to you, brother. Appreciate you so much. Thank you for this thing you started, and thank you for being like the ultimate supporter continuously.
You got it, man. Thanks for having me.